Can you say that?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Swamiji, we have good number of new devotees today.
Okay,
So maybe we can have some introduction to them.
please.
To meet you.
And can they introduce themselves to me?
Yes, yes. And
Okay.
Sharma ji here, she came first time. Up, without, introduce yourself.
Swamiji, my name is Satish Sharma.
Hmm.
I live in India, Indore, MP.
Ah.
I'm visiting here.
Oh, okay, very good.
And
What we saw last night. Okay. Yeah.
Robert is here.
Hello, Swamiji. My name is Robert Sinclair. I live in farther east North Carolina.
Mm,
I've been here a few times and I'm happy to be here.
very good.
Yeah,
to see you.
Thank you.
Oh, Swamiji, I'm Gustavo Furtado. I live in North Carolina, from Brazil originally.
From Brazil?
Yeah,
Which place?
Belo Horizonte.
Belo Horizonte. Okay. I've been there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Did you like it?
I liked it very much.
Before.
Yeah.
Ah,
So, probably not.
And I only discovered that these centers existed at all recently. I mean, I grew up from Krishna, but not about the centers. And I live half an hour away, but I only found out like 3 months
right.
ago
Okay.
or something like that. But
Ah.
this is here.
I went about probably 15 years ago, something like that,
Nice.
in Brazil. So, we'll start with the song.
তুমি ব্রহ্ম রাম কৃষ্ণ তুমি কৃষ্ণ তুমি রাম তুমি ব্রহ্ম রাম কৃষ্ণ তুমি কৃষ্ণ তুমি রাম তুমি ব্রহ্ম রাম কৃষ্ণ
Using this onion illustration to see, is there anything substantial in this ego sense? We're not talking about the real I, we're talking about this superficial feeling of personality. Is there any substance to it? As you peel off the skin of an onion, you find it consists only of skin. You cannot find any kernel in it. So we know this. If we think that we'll peel off all the layers and we'll find something inside. When we finally get to the last layer, there's nothing inside. Maybe a small space. And that space, once the onion is gone, that small space is infinite space. Because this covering can't really limit space at all. It gives that appearance. We talk about even a jar, the space inside the jar. We break the jar, what happened to the space inside? It was always infinite space. But because of the coverings, we think it's something small, something particular, but we don't find anything. So this is that one illustration. He says, as you peel off the skin of an onion, you find it consists only of skin. You cannot find any kernel in it. So, when analyzing the ego, it will be found that there is no real entity that you can call I. Now, this is a highly Vedantic interpretation, a Dvaita Vedantic interpretation, that this sense of I will be some false understanding of who we are. That there's no real substance to this ego, and we very often talk about Sri Ramakrishna's philosophical outlook on things. Was he an Advaitin? Was he a qualified Advaitin? Vishisht Advaitin? Because he gives the example of the bell fruit so many times. With all the seeds inside, there'll be all the jivas and everything. But if we follow this illustration, there's no reality even to this individual jiva. That there's only one space. We may all be different onions, but once everything is peeled off, there's only one infinite space. So this is really a very Advaitic point of view. We find it in the Upanishads. The first time we read about this doctrine, the Taittiriya Upanishad, and then we get to Vivek Chudamani and this long section on these 5 koshas. So anyhow, such an analysis of the ego convinces one that the ultimate substance is God alone. When egotism drops away, divinity manifests itself. So Thakur says, if you search for Ami is a Bengali word for I, you'll find Tini, and which is thou, the God. We search for the I and we find God there in its place. Then this is there are many different places he talks about this. The second place in the Gospel. If one analyzes oneself, one doesn't find any such thing as I. Take an onion, for instance. First of all, you peel off the red outer skin, then you find thick white skins. Peel these off one after the other, and you won't find anything inside. Now, he's not saying you find God inside here. Now, he's just saying we don't find anything. So this is the empty nature of the self. We talk about this distinction between Buddhist philosophy and Vedanta philosophy. Is it shunya? Is it jhana? Is it empty? Is it emptiness? Is it fullness? The real Vedantic position is that consciousness is empty. Consciousness is empty. It has nothing within it. If you had something within it, it couldn't be a pure experiencer of anything. Everything would be colored by consciousness. And now everything is colored by the mind, but consciousness is the witness is there to see it. So we have this understanding that there can't be any quality or attribute to consciousness itself. If we take sunlight, does light have any color? Can we see light?
It's colorless.
Light is colorless. Light is invisible. Huh? Huh? Can we see light? No. How do we know that the light is on in the room?
So you will experience
Because we see objects.
Yeah.
Yeah. We see objects. How do we know that there's consciousness? Consciousness also, it's empty. We know there's consciousness because there's experience. We see things, we hear things, we think things, but consciousness isn't adding anything to it. It's like a mirror. If a mirror actually has some image on it, if there's something in the mirror, we won't see ourselves in it. If light has a color, we won't know the color of objects. If we put a filter on light, then everything looks red if it's a red filter. If you want to know the real color, then there has to be some light that's pure that won't tinge it in any way. So when we peel this onion and we get to that emptiness, it doesn't mean nothingness. It means this pure consciousness has no content to it. All the content to consciousness is external to consciousness. This is Vedantic position. It's also in Western philosophy, this phenomenological position. It's, that even the sense of I, this ego is an object presented to consciousness itself, which is perfectly empty. So we'll see this ego will be one of the layers of the onion that will get peeled away also. And then what we're left with, how will Sri Ramakrishna explain what we're left with? They will leave. Right? That's the answer. Mukhe baladana. No one can say what we're left with. Just as Thakur gives the illustration with the sun reflected in all the containers, And when all the containers are there, there's no reflected sun. How many suns are there? And Gidi says that one real sun. And Tara says no, that no one's there to even say what is at that point. So Buddhists can say nothing, the Vedantists can say perfection, infinity, fullness, but no one can really say anything at that point. So this is that illustration of peeling the onion. The main point is that if we're doing it to find this ego sense, we'll find that there's no real ego. If we're doing it to find the real nature of the self, we'll find that it's indescribable. We'll find that it's pure and empty, not nothingness, but there's no internal content to it. Everything that we think of as content of consciousness belongs to mind. It belongs to mind, and it may have an external stimulus with sense perception, or else it'll just be thought, imagination, or something like that. So this is that illustration of the onion. Now, as I was saying before, Thakur didn't have to use the onion. He could have stayed with this illustration we get from the Upanishads, this idea, just concentric circles. But there are secondary meanings to all of these analogies that we find in Vedanta that I think are sometimes equally important. I'll give one example. We all know about the snake and the rope. If we happen to see a rope lying on the ground in twilight, it's not very easy to see things. We may think that it's a snake, and we go up and we examine it, we find that it was only a rope. And the illustration is meant to show that Brahman itself will appear as this universe, but it doesn't undergo any real change. It's our misconception of it. But the secondary meaning is that when we think it's a snake, then we become afraid. So that when we understand this real truth of the nature of our being, the nature of this world, the nature of God, then fear disappears. So that would be the secondary meaning, but it's also important. So the secondary meaning of this onion, for me, is that there's something interconnected and organic with all of these different sheaths, just as we find with the onion itself. So this is technically what's known as this Panchakosha doctrine. This is a doctrine that there are 5 separate coverings. And the point that I want to make is that they're not really separate. They're all interconnected somehow. When we peel an onion, we know. Sometimes there's even a membrane in between that connects the two. Sometimes it's hard to peel them, that one doesn't come off easily. But they break it down into 5. Now, could it have been 6? Could it have been 7? Could it have been 10? Yes. I don't take these things, I don't think they're meant to be so literal. I always think that it would have been nice to have at least 6. There should be a kosher for the senses. Indriyamaya kosher. We don't have that one. We can stick it in with pranamaya kosher. But anyhow, this is something particular to Vedantic thought, that we'll find many categories of things that we don't have to take as absolute. Even something like the 3 gunas. I think we could have just had 2 of them. Tamas and Rajas are so close, and then Sattva is so different, or we could have had 5 or 10 if we really wanted. So there's something a little arbitrary about these things, but helpful still. Or in Sankhya philosophy, we have something called antakarana. This antakarana is what we call in the West mind. But it'll have 4 different elements to it. It'll have manas, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. So mind as something which sorts out everything, that's manas. There's buddhi, which makes decisions, that's it, intellect. There's ahankara, this sense of I. And then chitta, and this, we can say memory, like that. But we could have had 5 or 6, we could have had more. We could have had imagination, projection, so many different things. So there's nothing absolute about these distinctions. And the same thing with these different koshas. We know that we have these different coverings. we can go beyond this physical body. We actually have coverings which have to do with our ethnicity, have to do with our religious affiliation, political affiliation, everything else. These are also facades, coverings to the self that we have. We keep adding things on and on and on, not just as a physical body, but all of the things that we identify with our culture, with our country, with our religion. These are also koshas that we have to peel off if we want to get to the real nature of the self. So we're given these 5. The first one is called Annamaya kosha. And this is the sheath of this physical body. And inside of that, so this idea of concentric circles, so this will be the gross outer one. And this again why Thakur uses the onion, because there's a little bit of a brown, depending on what type of onion it is, but a darker color, and it'll be a little brittle or a little hard, something like that. And then inside, it gets a little bit of the lighter color and a little more fine, we can say. So inside of this, Annamaya kosha, is a pranamaya kosha. So the pranamaya kosha will be the sheath of energy, life, this is vital force. And we're saying there's nothing exactly that corresponds to the senses. So we could say maybe the senses in there, something like that. And then inside of that, manomaya kosha is mind, and then vijnanamaya kosha, intellect. Now these two really can be taken as one. There's not such a big distinction between mind and intellect, but a very important distinction. Otherwise, they more or less form one category. And then inside of that is anandamaya kosha. And this has many different types of meanings. One is that it corresponds to what we call this causal body, karana sharira. And it's that which explains where storehouse of all of our experiences, our samskaras and everything, that's also there. It's used to explain the experience of dreamless sleep. And it's also anandamaya kosha. This is closest to the self within. So any higher spiritual experience, they say, belongs to this anandamaya kosha. Now, this ties in with a second theory that is the theory of the 3 bodies: Stula Sharira, Sukshma Sharira, and Karana Sharira. So the first one, this gross body, will be the Annamaya kosha. And Pranamaya kosha, we'll see this Pranamaya kosha, on one level it fits in with the body. Body has to have life. But without it, this mind doesn't function also. So they're all interconnected. But clearly, Manomaya kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha, these belong to the subtle body. So these are just 2 side-by-side theories, one breaking into 5, one breaking into 3. And then when we get this anandamaya kosha, that's clearly karana sharira, causal body. So the reason it's called causal body is that this is the seed of everything. When we go to sleep at night, and another thing, this corresponds to the 3 states of waking, dream, and dreamlessness. So we have all these things that correspond to each other. So the waking state, we have all 5 sheaths. You see, if you have any outer one, it has to include the inner one. So if the annamaya kosha, this physical body, is functioning, that means automatically we have to say that the mind and the senses and everything, that's all included in the waking state. In the dream state, this physical body is not part of the equation. It's there lying in the bed. It's not that it disappeared, but we have some imagined body at that time. But then there also has to be this manomaya kosha, and this causal body that also is there providing the food for the dream, providing the content for it. But dreamless sleep state, this will be that state where there's no content at all. It's kind of an empty state. But when we wake up, how do we explain the fact that we're the same person we were before, that we have the same memory, everything else is exactly the same? Because this Anandamaya kosha, this is also causal body, everything is in seed form. As soon as we wake up, it comes back again into active form. And this Anandamaya kosha or Karana Sharira, this is also what we call this subconscious. And this subconscious is what allows us to have some continuity of personality. That all of our opinions and ideas and concept, everything remains somehow present within and affects the way we act and think in the world without our awareness of it. So it's below this conscious level. So that's this Karanasura. So we have these 5 different sheets. Annamaya kosha is the body. Pranamaya kosha. I like to think of it as the senses, because we don't have anything that corresponds exactly to the senses. Now, when we say senses, this is what I was really trying to emphasize. Senses belong to the physical body in terms of these external organs, ears, eyes, nose, all of that. But it also belongs to this pranamaya kosha, because we have these subtle organs. And as Swamiji explains, that we experience sense perception in the mind itself. So this sense perception, all the first 3 different koshas will all be involved in that. That Swamiji says where is the real sense of sight? It's not the eyeball. Because the eyeball can be functioning, the mind is someplace else. We don't see anything. So these are the 5 koshas as expressed in the Vedanta philosophy to explain what is the nature of the individual self, of a person. We have that divinity within, and it's covered by all of these different sheaths, giving the impression of a separate single individual. Now this Vijnanamaya kosha and this Manomaya kosha, in one sense, I think they can be combined. And it's almost as if this Vijnanamaya kosha grows out of the Manomaya kosha. And this goes to the fact that as human beings we develop. It's not that we're all born at the same time with all of these 5 koshas equally developed. And this is the stage of maturation when we become reflective human beings. This ability to reflect and to have some sense of I, this really comes out of this Vijnanamaya kosha. This is one of the great differences between the Sankhya philosophy. Sankhya philosophy just says, well, there's something in the mind called ego, ahankara, and they don't explain it. Vedanta is very subtle, that we develop some sense of self-awareness and we falsely identify with everything, and this sense of ego comes, this sense of I. So this Vijnanamaya kosha, we'll get to it later, how it develops, and on some level this is the difference between children and adults, between the lower animal kingdom and higher animal kingdom, responsible people and irresponsible people, immature people and mature people. All this question of how this Vijnanamaya kosha develops, and what we can do so that we have really some clear sense of self-awareness. We make this distinction between mind and intellect. That manas is what helps us sort things out. When we see things, we know that this is that, and but it doesn't give us that sense of agency. This Vijnanamaya kosha will say, yes, I know this and this and this, so now I can decide that I want to do something. So they say that it's nischayatmika buddhi, that it's the nature of making decisions. And so we have to ask, at what level do we start making real decisions? At what level in the animal kingdom, an evolutionary scale? Are there decisions, or is it just automatic reaction, intuitive behavior, or however we understand it? So all of these things are part of this development of all of these koshas, how they form and how they develop.
Where does the samskara come from?
Samskaras. Okay, this, we'll get to this a little bit later also, but we have something called samskara. Samskara is an impression. And in the Sankhya philosophy, the whole concept of mind, chitta, is that it's some type of malleable substance. Not like the brain exactly, although the brain also will get grooves and things, and it'll also form synapses and everything. But on a subtle level, something similar to that. And just as if our behavior is repeated over and over again, that even the brain will change its shape a little bit. That they do all these experiments, Buddhist monks and things, that because so much time meditating, that area of the brain will be a little bit more developed. So the same thing happens with mind itself, that it forms different grooves, so that we do things in the same way, we think in the same way, we repeat things. So these samskaras become tendencies. It's an impression on one level, but that impression means that a tendency. So if we react in one way, there's a tendency to do it the same way again. And if we take these samskaras as coming from a previous lifetime, now, what is it that travels from this one physical body to another physical body? Now, remember what I said before, that the outer one has to contain the inner one. So it has to be the Karana Sharira also. Because Sukshma Sharira, there's a mind, and that's conscious. So what leaves the body, at some point there'll be some almost unconsciousness or something, because a newborn child doesn't remember anything. So that means some scars will have to be part of this causal body. They'll be there waiting to blossom. This is what Swamiji calls evolution, involution and evolution. So everything, all of our tendencies, all of our desires, all of our skills and talents and everything, they'll go into some type of seed form. And when these samskaras are affecting our behavior unconsciously, and this is known as, it can be sometimes prejudice and bias and everything, that means that it's in this causal body. When the samskaras are something we're aware of, then it's in the subtle body. So there's not this sharp distinction that we like to make. This is my point. That these categories aren't separate compartments. They go back and forth, they work together. So these tendencies become part of our character. And it's not something that we're aware of. Most of the time we're not aware of it. So that means it belongs to this causal body. But it gets into the subtle body, of course, because it affects the way we think and live and act in the world. Most of what we call personality is hidden to us. A lot of it is somebody will ask us, oh, what's your belief system, this and that, and we can say all of these things, but there'll be a huge amount of it that's unknown to us, hidden to us, that is in the subconscious, not all from the previous lifetime, from a whole lifetime, childhood, so many things we don't remember that affect us. And these also are the type of samskara. So that'll be part of this causal body, subtle body together. If we say subtle body, it includes the causal body. If we say gross body, it includes all three. Okay, so let me see where we are. Now, I'll give a little preview because I want to just explain. Now, tomorrow I'll talk about it. What is the point of all this? How does it help us? One thing, it lets us understand the nature of the self, the pure nature of the self, and it also helps us understand formation of personality, and it helps us understand how we become identified with all these external things and how we end up in bondage. So This is one thing. It helps us understand this human development, even from fetus in the womb up until the birth and adulthood. And it helps us understand this empty nature of the ego. It helps us explain the different states of consciousness, waking, dream to sleep state. It helps us understand how in meditation we can transcend these one by one. We lose awareness of this physical body, we try to withdraw the mind, we try to withdraw it from the senses. That means we're going beyond Maya Kosha, beyond. So it helps us with that. And then finally, how this whole process of rebirth, what is it that can leave this body? So from that point of view, this Annamaya Kosha, at that time it really becomes separate from the others, like the coconut, and with the realized soul, they become separate because there's no identification. He talks about the coconut. When all of the water dries up inside of the coconut, then the flesh of it will free itself from the outer shell. Sometimes, if you go to buy a coconut, you can shake it back and forth, you feel the inside bouncing inside. This is the God realized soul. What happens in the body doesn't affect the mind inside. So it's very helpful in all of these different ways, and for spiritual practice also. Now, I want to get to... I'm going to talk a little bit about the organic nature of this and how it grows. Again, it's not that we're human beings and we come into this world with all of them. We know even physically this Annamaya Kosha, how that develops. And this Pranamaya Kosha, when does life become part of the whole equation? Now, there's a huge question for this abortion issue. Does life begin at conception? Does life begin with the birth of the child? When does life begin? This pranamaya kosha, prana. Yeah, this is a different type of question. That's a theological question which really has to do with the belief that the soul will enter at some point. If we take this from the Vedantic point of view, then even the egg that will, before fertilized, before anything, it has life. Everything has life. Yeah. So there's not a question of that. When does that have? Now the other question is when the fetus is first born. The second that it's a fetus, then it's Annamaya Kosha. But that will have to develop. There are no senses at that point. So gradually within the womb, the distinction between within the womb and outside of the womb is not so absolute. What is the difference between the 8th month and the 9th month and the 9th month in birth? One is inside, one is outside. But still, the features are developing. It's all organic, one after the other, after the day after day after day. The day before birth and the day after birth, how much difference is there? The umbilical cord is cut, and breathing on its own, that's an important distinction, of course. But otherwise, in terms of mind, what's the difference between the experience that the fetus has, if it has an experience, at the 9th month, and the experience it has after coming out of the womb? It won't be terribly different. It won't be some automatically radical now a person is there. Everything is organic in growing stages and stages and stages like that. The senses, at what point are the senses functioning? Now, we have some assumption that the sense of hearing has already developed at some stage before the birth of the child. In some of the scriptures that we have these stories. This queen, Madalasa, how she would chant to the unborn children, Niranjanastvam, all these things, you're pure, you're perfect and everything, and they were born and grew up, they all realized themselves and it took off. And I I know now they have all of these CDs and things, Beethoven for fetuses, something like that. I remember my sister when she was pregnant that she used to do that with the assumption that the fetus can hear from within the womb. Huh? So the senses are now if the fetus can hear with a child, unborn child, however we understand it, these are all highly loaded, religious questions at this point. We're not going to get into any of that. But that means mind has to be there. Senses don't function without mind. So mind has to be developed on some level. And of course, nothing works without consciousness. That's the key to everything. So we see that the development that takes place, even from the time of conception, that it's a continuum, it's organic. It's just the onion. When is it a fully formed onion? Is there the one time that we can say that when is it time to dig it up and that it's ready to be and how is it when it's underground? How is it forming these new layers? I always wonder about that. Are they all there at the beginning undeveloped? Does it start with one and then another goes outside, or they go from the outside in? Any biologists here?
Inside out,
They grow inside out.
yeah,
Ah,
inside, and then the out, then it goes from inside, more are formed and so then the outer.
so that like the hard outer skin of the onion, that actually forms last.
No,
No.
that is there, but inside it's growing,
So inside of that, we have the body,
yeah.
and then inside of that the others are growing into it. Okay. So the-
Inside
The
goes,
one that is
outside
first
the-
will be the outer
The
layer.
one that's first is the outer layer.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So the body has to be there first. So there's anamanakos, and then the others develop after that. Yeah. So that corresponds, quite well.
There's a question, Swamiji.
Oh yeah, please.
Namaskar.
Do that.
Given that heavy subject you just described, what will be the Vedantic position on abortion? If we were to ask
Yeah.
to go, the Vedantic people to go in a panel, like the other faiths, what will be our position? Vedantic position, not our position.
Yeah. Traditionally, of course, it's considered one of the great sins. This Mahabharata. But this will be a theological point. From the Vedantic point of view, whatever is that subtle body, that will continue. If the physical body is destroyed, through abortion, then the journey that individual soul, jiva, is taking, however we understand it, that will continue. Then it'll have to take another body. Now, the abortion question, I don't want to get into too much of politics, but there's one very specific.
No, I wasn't asking politically.
Yeah.
I was really asking for an understanding.
Yeah. So yeah, this subtle body will not be destroyed when the physical body is destroyed. So that it won't. How it affects karmically, we don't know. That's a different story. What type of karma it'll have, but the subtle body it'll have to can take another physical body, be born again somehow. So it's there's no killing of the, if we want to use the word soul, that will continue the journey somehow. Now, the different schools of Vedanta may be a little different, because some will take this jiva as some absolute entity, it's a real individual soul. Others will say that, according to Advaita Vedanta, anything that could reflect that sun, and it has the container that has the proper water in it, that's what we're calling the jiva. It has no absolute reality. Jiva is like the ego that we're finding doesn't have any substance to it. It's just this kind of identification with external things. So there'll be differences of opinion within Vedanta itself. This is my feeling, but It won't be anything that this child that's killed will go to hell, this will happen, or anything like that. There's nothing, it'll be some organic or automatic path will continue, so however these things work. We don't really understand too much, but yeah, the theological issue has a lot to do with things like baptism that we don't think about, and how a unborn child, if it's not baptized, won't be able to go to heaven, and things that are really not applicable at all to this Vedantic view of things.
Swamiji, there's contradictions or ambiguities in the description from Vedanta, like the light example. The light is not any color; it's when it shines on something that we see it. But that's a dualist position, no? Because you have light and you have things. Or when we talk about the reincarnation as a presumption, and then we talk about the absence of a self, like the onion, then what reincarnates? And so I feel like a lot of the examples end up implying dualism in
This is a little bit of a misunderstanding.
okay.
Now, the first one is a good point. If we're really talking about there's no such thing as a jiva, what we never really say a jiva goes to another body. The subtle body goes to another physical body. That's the way it's explained there. But this idea that we reject this relative universe completely in the Advaita Vedanta is not true. It has a relative value. This is called the Vyavaharika point of view. So Vedanta will constantly use illustrations that accept the relative reality of this physical universe. We don't accept this as a dream in a literal sense. In a literal sense, there are some schools that do, but in general, even Shankaracharya, he accepts the relative value of this universe. Somehow, it's the projection of outer Brahman. It takes some objectivity. It has some objective reality to it, so we can use these types of illustrations. Shankaracharya is always using these types of illustrations. This is a Vedantic illustration, the sun reflected in objects. Ultimately, we'll say the object is also from Brahman itself, or one with Brahman, but from a lower point of view, we make this distinction. Even we make a distinction between real and unreal. There's two categories of things. What's changing and what's not changing, two categories of things. So, but the point behind it is all non-dualistic, but we have to use these, from this relative point of view, we use these types of illustration. Yeah. So, what is the experience of the newborn child then? This Annamaya Kosha has developed to a certain extent, and senses are now functioning to a certain extent, mind is there. But Jnanamaya Kosha we're not going to talk about, it's not there at this point. And this Anandamaya Kosha, that is not playing too much of a role yet, till the mind gets developed more. So what is the experience of the child, newborn child? It's a very interesting question. How does the child, newborn child, see the world?
Why am I here now?
The manager.
Why am I here?
Why, yeah, what happened, yeah. I was, there's this so Bengali song, that I was so happy in the womb, now look where I've become,
In Bhagavatam also there is a thing explaining that when it's in the womb, it's like it's with the God.
And then
it comes out.
because this mind that's not really functioning, this mind that is just has no sense of separation or anything, is really almost one with consciousness, somehow like that. Now the perception of the child, of the newborn child, is something that we can call a pure perception. Now what do we mean by pure perception? There's a school of Western philosophy called phenomenology. I refer to it sometimes. That was my subject when I was college. My college subject. It's a very interesting school. There's something called, this is pure perception, phenomenological reduction. When we try to understand what's present to awareness and what we see. There's a big difference. What's present to awareness if we analyze now what is present to awareness, colors and shapes. So the child, newborn child, won't see objects, won't see people, won't be able to recognize anything. It'll see colors and shapes.
It sees colors and shapes as a newborn.
Yeah, it won't be able to say this is red, this is blue, this is green. But if we take a snapshot of what's the content of the mind of the child, it would just be something that can't be identified. The only thing, what is present to us now, even now, just colors and shapes. But we see objects. Yeah. So look at the difference between hearing a language that you know and hearing a language that you don't know. Yeah. Hearing a language that we don't know, we're hearing sounds. Hearing a language we know, we're hearing words. So the newborn will just hear sounds and just see colors and shapes.
Until they go to school and they're taught.
A child when it's about 2.5 months starts smiling. And this is something I noticed just a few months ago. My new neighbors, they had a baby.
Yeah.
And the baby was about close to 3 months. And I said, well, he's smiling. And they said, yes, he smiles when he's happy, content. So there's a feeling of...
mind is there, of course.
Yeah, but
yes.
Development that it's now expressing in a smile is...
Yes, that'll be a little automatic, of course.
Yeah.
Child won't decide to smile, but yes, most things that the child understands, either I'm comfortable or I'm not comfortable.
Yeah.
Either I'm hungry or I'm not hungry, but they won't be able to say it.
No.
If they're hungry, they'll cry. Yeah, but little by little,
It's expressing itself.
yeah, the child in the beginning can't distinguish between its own body and its mother's body. There's no sense of anything. So just pure perception, just consciousness. When an artist tries to make a painting, the artist has to know what is it that people see before they see things. There's impressionism. We want to give an impression of something as the way people really see it. It's really an interesting field. If you just take any example, if you look at, okay, everyone sees the shelf here, right? Can you see? Not everybody. Okay, those can see the shelf. What color is the wall underneath the shelf?
Dark gray.
Huh?
The same as the.
Off-white. Off-white. Now, what about the area right beneath it?
Yes.
It looks like it's dark brown or gray, dark gray to me. Now, is the wall two different colors? No. Well, why is it a different color?
Shadow.
Shadow. Okay. When we see that, we see a perfectly white wall, and the mind knows what a shadow is. It's learned that. That's part of the Anandamaya Kosha, Karana Shurya. So we don't question it. If I'm looking at somebody close to me and somebody far from me, I don't think, oh, there's somebody who's only 4 feet tall. Automatically I know that this is a tall person from a distance. Yeah? This is all learned. This is all learned. And this is all part of this goes into this Anandamaya Kosha because we don't have to think about this. It becomes completely automatic for us. I saw a documentary once. It was called The Brain. It was very brilliant. It should have been called The Mind. That was my only mistake, the thing that I thought was wrong about it. It was about a man who was born blind and had a otherwise normal life. He had a job, he had a family, he had a wife and children. And the doctors discovered some procedure by which they could, I don't know, replace the eyeballs or the optic nerve, something like that, so he could get his sight back. So everyone was so excited that he'll see the face of his wife, the face of his children for the first time, and they thought it would be a wonderful thing. So they performed this operation, it was successful, and he opened his eyes, and just a mass of color. He didn't see anything. He couldn't recognize an object or anything. He had no context for anything because he had never experienced it before. And it took years before he could learn. In the beginning, he couldn't even cross the street. He didn't, yeah, how do you distinguish, how do you learn distance? How do you learn perspective? All of these different things. We take these things for granted. The artist doesn't take it for granted. If you look at a window, we look at a window from an angle, we see it's perfectly square. But it's not square. From our point of view, if you had to draw it, you would see the part that's closer to you is greater, and the part that's other is smaller, perspective and everything like that. Our mind automatically assimilates and does these things. This is this anandamaya kosha. It gets stored through our experience. This is how we learn things, but we learn bad things also, and form prejudices and things. Yeah.
So a lot of things that you mentioned, those are kind of in a realistic world, those would be applicable. But is it possible that very newborn kids might have a different way of understanding the world? Because I heard somewhere that many kids are clear-eyed until they turn 6 or 7, and at that time they are able to see something that physical eye won't see, and that's why they have like invisible friends and kind of things. And then parents would come and tell them, oh, there is nothing, or just look at, this is a stuffed animal, this is bunny, and then they effectively erase that faculty and only start to operate in a dualistic physical world.
Possible. I don't know how you can quantify these things. It's possible. Especially this idea of this purity of perception and this complete lack of overlaying things. See, this is our human mind is always adding. When we talk about the snake and the rope, it's not that there's nothing there. That every perception is partly objective and partly subjective, and we're constantly overlaying things. And it's good. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't recognize people. Every time we saw somebody, I say, oh, who are you? Huh? We see a face, automatically we know. We hear a language, automatically we understand it if we know that language. It becomes automatic. So this, we couldn't function without this, but at the same time, we see somebody behaving in a certain way, and the next time we see somebody who looks similar to that person, we think that person will act. This is called stereotype. And if we're not careful, the mind will create these for us, positive and negative both. So these are all part of how this development of these different koshas come. So this body is of the newborn. Body is developing, senses are developing. The storehouse is computing everything. Every experience is the computer's working there, so that each time we don't have to do it again. So now we recognize everything. And the only thing that's not functioning yet is a vijnanamaya kosha. That has to develop, mind has to develop to a certain point where there's some sense of self-awareness. I remember reading one time that one of the, there's a great French child psychologist, Piaget, was his name, that he said one of the developmental points of a child is when it first tells a lie. That, I mean, that it has some sense that there's some privacy of the mind, that it can know something that's true and other people won't know it because it's in my mind. So, well, you remember Swamiji met one young man in India, and this man, he was a young boy, he was saying, yes, how sattvic I am, this and everything, and Swamiji saw that he was full of tamasi, and he's just a very mild personality. So Swamiji said to him, can you tell a lie? And he said, oh no, Swamiji, I could never tell a lie. He said, then learn to tell a lie. That would at least recognize that, you can do something. He didn't literally mean that, but at least something like that. So this is also a stage of development. I had a conversation once with one of my nieces when she was very young. I don't remember the age, I wish I remembered, maybe 5 or 6. We had a childhood friend who had some developmental problems. He was emotionally, mentally challenged as a child. His behavior was very odd and everything. So she was asking, why does he act like that? So I said to her, I thought I was very clever. I said, sometimes you can have some illness illness or something in the body, he has something like that in his mind. So she looked at me and she said, "What's the mind?" Yeah. And then I assume, we take it for granted. But at that age, they don't even know what the mind is. This is Katupanishad. It says that all our sense of false identifications comes from the fact that the mind goes outward and is not even aware of itself. And then we form this identification that way, outward, before we reach the stage where we want to go inward, that samskara is formed, that we become identified with everything else. So the mind can be developed. Mind, this manomaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha, completely different. Belong to the same faculty of thought, but completely different things. Take an animal, take a dog, for example. Now, we say that the sense of smell is highly developed in a dog. But it's not just the sense of smell, it's the mind. Because if a dog can recognize, several hundred different smells, that means that that's the function of mind, manas, to sort things out and make distinctions between things. So highly developed mind. So the dog will know that this is a human being, this is this animal, that animal, rotten food, good food. It'll know all of those things without knowing that it knows. And automatically it'll run away if it's some enemy is there. Not that it can think that, oh, I smell a human being, that this is a danger to me, I better run away. It doesn't have to do that, it becomes automatic. But the mind, with regard to the sense of smell, is more highly developed than ours.
So, Swamiji,
Yeah.
so does it not have to do with the biology as well? Like even we might have that capability, but because we are not biologically eligible to distinguish between those 100 smells, we are not able to do that.
I think so. Now, it could be explained in terms of samskaras and everything, but I think that this is just part of the makeup of that particular species of animal that we don't have. Yeah, biologically you can say our range of hearing is much more limited. We have something called a dog whistle. The dogs can hear things at a very high pitch, so they have a whistle. If you want to call your dog, you don't have to disturb the whole neighborhood. You blow the whistle, nobody can hear it, but the dogs can hear it. So, yeah, we can explain that biologically, that our sense of hearing, our ear, is not made in such a way that it can hear sounds that are at a certain high pitch or a certain low pitch.
So those capabilities might be latent in us.
I don't think so. Now, there may be certain things that through certain types of practices and that we can increase our power, but I think these are just limitations that we have. That I don't know of anyone who's developed the power to hear things above our normal range.
But they do get heightened. Someone who's blind,
Yeah.
the other senses will be more heightened.
Now, I'll tell you an interesting thing. At one time I was very interested in Helen Keller. I read some books about her.
Right.
And
Exactly.
she was very disappointed to find out that her other senses were not, didn't improve. Her other sense really means sense of touch and everything. But the ability of the mind to focus on it was better. So it's not exactly, we always assume that we lose one sense and another one takes over, it's just our ability to concentrate. Not necessarily that our sight will become better if our hearing gets worse, something like that. But
Yeah, it's the mind that develops.
it's the mind, everything goes back to the mind. Now, what about this vijnanamaya kosha? This is really the key. That this vijnanamaya kosha develops at a certain point and gradually develops. This is that sense of self-awareness, this sense of ourselves as a person. And this is what distinguishes the child from the adult in the legal system. Why do we have different laws and different standards for juveniles and adults? We generally won't use the capital punishment for those who are under the age of majority. That the assumption is that this development, of course they won't say it, but this Vijnana Maya Kosha hasn't developed fully. That they haven't reached the point where we can consider them responsible for all of their actions because they're functioning mostly due to instinct and this Anandamaya Kosha, this Karana Shurya, is directing their activities, and the mind hasn't reached that state of maturity where it can monitor and say, no, you can't do that. So this is why very small children, at a certain age, we can say, no, I told you you can't have these cookies. Yeah, and I know you understood it, and still you disobeyed me. And we'll give them a little punishment. When they're younger than that, we say, what can we do? This is an automatic thing. So for individuals, this is what we're trying to develop, this Vijnana Maya Kosha. This is that ability to monitor things. And it's also, this is what explains the sense of I. So the sense of jiva, I'm an individual. This comes out of this Vijnana Maya Kosha. Do other animals have it? This sense of I.
How could we know?
So there was one experiment done on chimpanzees and monkeys, and what they did was they placed a mirror in front of them, and they were able to recognize them. They were able to. One of the chimpanzees had a spot on their face, so they were able to see that spot, clean their teeth. So then the scientists were able to conclude that yes, they do have a sense of I-ness.
Yeah.
They can recognize themselves.
Exactly. That's the very example I was going to give. That we're very human-centric people. Almost every religion will say that the human being is something very unique, special. That they're the only ones who have this free will and a sense of self-awareness. But some other highly developed primates, chimpanzees, apes, or something, they can communicate. They can recognize themselves, so some sense of I is there. If we say that this Vijnanamaya Kosha is responsible for things like compassion and sympathy and things like that, I would say it's more highly developed in dogs than in human beings. There's a sense of loyalty and sense of love and everything. So there's no sharp dividing line between separating all of these things and how things develop and everything.
So with Vijnana Maya Kosha, would you say, Swamiji, it's, it would be frontal lobe cortex development?
I don't know, I'm sure that it corresponds to something in the brain. I don't have that expertise. But I'm sure that the materialist will explain this in terms of brain development. The Vedantists will explain it the other way, that the mind that functions in that way, that will almost create the higher development of the brain. However it works, but yeah, there should be something corresponding to it. Yeah, within the brain, we find that with other functions and everything.
So I gathered that Vijnana was experience, whereas Jnana is just knowledge.
Yes, this Manomaya Kosha, this is connected with the senses to a great extent. This ability to distinguish things. And say with language. The ability to recognize words and everything. This is the mind can do all of that. The reaction to it. You say something to me, the reaction, and the decision that I have to make. You said something nasty, do I want to say something nasty back? So the Vijnanamaya Kosha has a lot to do with what we call free will. And there's another big question in Vedanta, I won't go into the whole thing, but free will and responsibility. So this is why we're held responsible for our actions. You can't go into court of law and say, well, this is my samskara made me do it. If we really believe it, then that means that it's a plea of insanity. Otherwise, if we're sane, adult human beings, we have to take responsibility for our actions. Now, does this mean that the samskaras are not at play? Yes, they're at play. They'll direct us and they'll make something appealing and something unappealing, but ultimately we take responsibility. So, at least legally, and from a Vedantic point of view, that as long as we accept the sense of I, we have to accept the sense of limited responsibility. If we reach that point where we see that God alone dwells within all beings, then forget about this question of free will. Then there's a different level. Thakur was on that level. We're not on that level. There's another level, but then we have to accept this idea that we're responsible for the decisions that we make, and ultimately we're responsible for the people who we think we are. And in Vedanta, we'll find this Vijnanamaya Kosha is what's responsible for falsely identifying. So the idea of these five koshas is not just so we understand the makeup of the human being, but we understand why we don't identify with the self, the real I. Because from childhood, from infancy, we've been identifying with external gross things. And then at the point in which we want to say, no, I'm the self, then we have all of these really strong samskaras there saying, no, I'm the body, I'm the personality. So we have to try to reverse all of that.
Swamiji,
Yeah.
I read somewhere up to age 7, the children are in the present moment, and they are taught the identification of the various objects. Until then, they are pure at heart, and that's how they learn the nomenclature and so on. So, and that means they are taught the objects of the senses, and that's when their mind begins to identify with the objects. Before that, it's like you said earlier, Swamiji, it's like learning a different language. For us, this sounds words. That's what it sounds like to the children until they're taught identification and brought, the senses are trained to catch the world objects outside, and then eventually we realize we need to bring the mind back, retrain the mind and go inward.
Yeah, these what gets stored in this subconscious mind, Karashurya, is very much a question of environment and culture and what we're taught. This is why the development of children is so important, that our personality is more or less fixed by the time we get into first grade, second grade, something like that. Many say that how much of this is samskaras, inherited samskaras, how much of it is learned, very hard to say. We find in one family 2 kids more or less the same upbringing, and one of them is very calm and quiet, and the other one is a terror. We don't know how to explain it exactly, so it's not all environment, not all teaching, but that plays a large role, of course. And this is why this karma shurya, that this can be very helpful for us, in that everything gets assimilated there. If we good teachings and everything, and kindness and love and everything gets, and also deep prejudice and anger and hatred and all sorts of rajasic, tamasic things also become second nature. They become habitual. Children who grow up in violent families, very often they become violent because this is their experience. These samskaras become like that. So, just to wrap things up, the whole point of this is for us to realize that we're something separate from all of these. These are all coverings. What we call this ego is also a covering. This personality, this jivahood and everything, that also belonging to this Vijnanamaya Kosha. We're something separate from that. We're the witness, we're the eternal self, We weren't born, we won't die, we never entered into a body, we'll never leave a body, the pure self. So all this emphasis has to be understood as dealing with this covering. This covering. Sri Ramakrishna, he used to use that type of language. Somebody, Pavhari Baba, he was told that he kept a picture of Sri Ramakrishna by his bed. He said it's just a pillowcase. It doesn't capture who I am. It's just an outer covering. And this outer covering includes the mind. It includes everything that we falsely identify. It includes the personality. You know, this word person comes from same word that we have for persona, which means a mask. Or personality is a mask. We take it as everything else is a mask covering our personality. Personality is a mask covering the self. And we're something separate from all of that. And that, of course, is our freedom. And then we feel oneness with everybody. So tomorrow, I want to put emphasis on the different spiritual practices, vichara, meditation, analyzing the state of consciousness, that will help us utilize this doctrine, either the 5 koshas or the 3 bodies, either one, that will help us in our spiritual practice.
Swamiji, last thing. Through my readings, I learned to equate the onion skins with the masks that we put on and then we take them off. The child is taught to do that as they grow and go into the schooling society. Put on the mask and then later on in life when we realize at this point we take them off, like the onion.
When we go to sleep at night and we dream, it's as if we're removing this physical body and hanging it up in the closet.
Right.
Like that, yeah. Okay, then we'll stop here now. Okay, I'll close that. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashantu Akashi Dukha Bhave Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May all beings be happy, may all be free from disease, may all realize the highest good, may not suffer from misery. Om peace.